we'll get into the presentation. If anyone else is interested in hearing this in the future, Clay will be sending out, or the emails that were sent out previously, you can join after the presentation is done with. It'll be recorded. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have any other questions, and we will be glad to help you out. So as we've gotten into going into Bovi-Insights a little bit more, hopefully everyone is getting a little bit more familiar, if not comfortable with some of the ways that it works. And so we'll go through some of that again. And this one will have a focus on the transition period, and some of the ways that we can take the data that's within BoviSync and slice and dice it in ways that can provide you with the flexibility to provide those insights to clients, as well as gain understanding for yourself, and learn a little bit more from the data that you have access to. So as we always like to bring up, we're here because we know that the people and processes that take place on a dairy are the key to making management simpler and more efficient, and that making sure that the data is entered and that it's uniform from the beginning is the foundation for being able to do these sort of reports and learn from the data that we have access to, or that you have access to. And once we have that, you're able to get into a little bit more detail. Oh, Peter, yes. I have, so Peter over in the UK is in the chat. We had a meeting yesterday where my daughter was ended up being the star presenter, and was squealing joyfully through most of it. I will not subject you all to that, although in all honesty, anything she's involved with does make it better, but you are stuck with just me today. Yes. Yeah, she is upstairs. So if it does go sideways, send some messages and I'll be sure to run up and get her. It'll make all better in the world. So in this short video, we'll go through how one would put together a relatively simple report that looks at the number of events, medical events and freshen events, and be able to look at it in two different ways depending on how you want to consume the report. So when you open up new event report, I just added an owner column, but otherwise it would look the same. In the, go back one, in the filter pane here, just to show what the filters that are going on are doing. I'm saying that the report date is today. The start date for the period is 18 months ago, ends today, and it's showing me all the event types for medical diagnosis and fresh events. So we have all these events here. We're able to change this date format to whatever way you want to look at it. I prefer doing a zero padded year and month, and then grouping by that. So as we do this series of grouping, what we're doing is looking at it by month, then by owner, then by the event type, and then the ear tag field defaults to counting the number of occurrences. So what you can see here is that within this month, Farm A has 373 freshen events, 361 medical diagnoses. Farm B has a total of 474 events. If you want to get a little bit more detail about each of those events, each event type has a specific event type. Some of those don't have additional details involved, but things like medical diagnoses or diagnostic tests or things like that have specific sorry guys, they have specific event types that are within the main heading. So in this one, you can see within this month, within this farm, these are all the medical diagnoses that took place, and this is the number of those events. So we have the ability to do this multi-layered grouping that lets you really drill down into what you're looking at, which is valuable, but sometimes we want to look at it in a different way. So that initial report was showing all the events. So now let's say we just want to look at things that happened in the first 30 days. So that's what I did there. I added a filter. So the entire report is going to filter just the events that occurred within the first 30 days in milk. And when you use that filter pane, it refreshes the entire report as opposed to using the filters in the column. So now here we have all these events that are just within the first 30 days in milk. Additionally, I'm adding a new item that we have. So we have a new formula and a few items that have already been made with it, which returns the Sunday of the week that the date occurs in. So basically any date, you can use a formula so it returns that week, the Sunday of that week. So that's what I did here just to show how that works. And when you're dealing with lots of animals, I do think it actually is beneficial to look at it on a weekly basis as opposed to a monthly. So I'll go through here, just ungroup some columns and bring up the base level of information, which is each event. And now I'm grouping by that event week. So you can see on the weekly dates with the count of each event that occurred. I'm able to drag columns around to format it in the way that I want. Trying to remember what I decided to do next. Yeah, there we go. I group by owner next. So you can do it by owner and then by event week, whatever kind of way that you like looking at it. Just as an example of how that functions. So I think that our ability to group things and drill down is really beneficial, but it can be a little cumbersome at times to go in and out of a bunch of levels just to get a single number that you want. So if you just wanted to see the number of clinical mastitis cases, so one way that you could do that is you could just filter within that specific event type field to just show those for all the farms. You could filter the entire report for just that. But I wanted to show a different way in case you wanted to have the flexibility to dive in and out of everything, but there were a few items that you wanted to always have present in your report. So in this one, what I'm doing, and there's a couple of examples, I'm just saying if that event type is a freshen, return a 1, if not, none. And then for this, I do medical diagnosis, and then I'll do an example with clinical mastitis. And so the end result of doing these formulas is that much like a pivot table where you can swap the columns and the rows headings, This isn't doing that. I'm not saying that we have a pivot table, but you can mimic a little bit of that in the sense of now I can have columns that are specific for fresh count and total medical diagnosis count and mastitis count. So that way, if I just want to look at the total for farm A, farm B, and farm C for those specific things, I can do it from that top line level without needing to dive all the way into all of the records. But the rest is there in case I want to dive in and look at anything else in particular. So that's what that one looks like. The next is a animal report, and this is one that I made today or yesterday that is similar to the concept of the next report I'll show, which is one of the global reports, our transition report card. And as you're looking at transition cows, there's the health aspect of things and there's the production aspect of things is the way that I kind of look at it. And those things are connected and related to one another, but sometimes you want to look at one side of the equation or the other. Now we have the ability to bring in all of those into a single report. It gets really wide and it's hard to visualize within the webinar format. So I made this one where I'm looking within the last year. So animals that freshened in the last year, that's what that fresh date is, greater than or equal to a year ago, that have a test result for their first test, butter, fat, and protein. So there's a result there. And that first test occurred within the first 21 days in milk. So I had it at just first test, but I wanted to make sure that the results were applying more directly towards early lactation animals and kind of weed out those animals that are 3-4 weeks into milk. And those results are not going to be quite the same analysis as you would one that's less than 3 weeks in milk. So with these filters in place, you can see in the report that we're looking at it by fresh date group. So all the animals that freshened within the month that's shown. So you get the count, the average of the first butter fat, average of the first protein, their fat to protein ratio. And then I put in a couple of cutoffs. So basically a small formula that said if the ratio for an individual animal was greater than 1.4, return a 1, if not a 0. And then I do the same for 1.5. So those numbers being the general numbers that are thrown out as far as are animals experiencing some degree of clinical or subclinical ketosis, mobilizing body fat, potentially having being predisposed to other effects of that negative energy balance early in lactation. So here you can see by a monthly basis that there is a fair amount of variation, and is one way that you can look at, how are these animals transitioning? Is there something management is doing that is helping or hindering the ability to get these animals through that period in the best situation possible going forward? I also included some other first test items that can be of use. So we have the linear score, average, the average somatic cell count, and then the percent that are greater than 200 somatic cell count on that first test. I also added the dry versus first test somatic cell count status. So whether or not compared to their last test before dry off, are they new infections? clean, cured, or chronic. So you can see how those change over time as well. And like everything with Bovi-Insights, the ability to drill down into different categories and to rearrange how you look at that data can be really powerful as you try to narrow down what are the factors involved in the results that you're seeing on the dairy. So sometimes those overall numbers might be perfectly acceptable, but if you dive into it by lactation um, and lactation by month, maybe you start to see that certain management changes are causing effects that need to be addressed. Also, as we've discussed before, as we've always been able to do with BoviSync, but I think is a bit more apparent with Bovi-Insights, we have the ability to log into multiple farms at a time and include that as an item within these reports. So, if you're working with a dairy that has multiple sites, being able to have all of those in a single report. You're working with several clients all in the same region and you want to benchmark and compare performance, being able to pull that in and compare as much apples to apples as possible, because you can break things down into smaller and smaller parts that it's harder to make excuses for one farm or another. Or to give praise to farms. It doesn't have to be all negative, give some prizes to the ones that are doing great. So just going through here, you can kind of see the different values that are there, how you can move things around. I'm trying to remember what I did next here. Yeah, I just ended at this is the base value for an animal report. So each line is an animal, and their data comes through there. You'll also be able to, if you click on that animal's number, go right to her cow card, her animal page, and look at all of the information that occurred for that animal in particular, as well as using the check boxes next to each line. You can check, I forget, Clay, how many we can max out at, but you can open a bunch of them at once in new tabs. So you can have those opening up as you're continuing to work on your report, and then go into detail if you'd like to. So this is the global report that we have available. So it's our transition report card. If you go to search reports and global reports and start typing in transition, it will come up and you can open the transition disease report card in a new tab. We've added that, which is helpful. And the regular transition report card. So I've opened up both of those into two tabs and loaded up this transition disease report card. And what we're seeing here is by owner for the last year, and animals that have calved in the last year. You're able to see the incidence of transition cow disorders. So RPs, metritis, milk fever, ketosis, DA is included in that. And also showing the rate of animals that are sold or died within 30 days, sold or died within 60 days, and died within 30 or 60 days. So you get kind of a snapshot of what is the incidence of these diseases and animals that are leaving the herd under uh, un, undesirable circumstances in most cases. Opening up each farm is going to show you the by fresh date, and again, grouping by however you want to look at that, by week, month, year, all those things. Tying in with lactation number, you can see items as expected. Third lactation animals are going to have a higher incidence of a lot of these things, as expected. So we can see that there. Pretty pretty standard as far as like what are the items that one would want to look at. So I went to the other tab that was in my browser. It's a similar report, except it has a couple other production parameters in there. So it has week 4, 8, and 12 milks, and it has the days in close-up, and it has this item short close-up 14, and that's basically saying what's the percent of animals that were in a close-up pen for less than 14 days. So you can see how that breaks down by farm and by month, or however you want to analyze that data. So I think all that's kind of nice. You get to see what those trends look like, how those management things can be discovered and addressed and monitored. The other side of this, which I think is really cool, and I'll show a short example of, is being able to take some of those items and look at what the outcome of it is. So I accidentally did transition count when I should have done short close-up. So I did it correctly there. So you can see in this short close-up, I have it's 0 or 1, and then there's a bunch of animals that don't have any value there. So this is because there are first lactation animals in this data set, so they're not going to have a close-up period that's recorded. And we're into multiple farms, and I think one of them didn't have a pen labeled as close-up.
Nick,
so yeah.
Did you explain how the login with multiple farms works when you were talking about the by owner summation?
I think we showed it in the past, but I've been hesitant to show it because my account just shows all the farms.
Right. I just think it's good to highlight what we're actually how this is actually happening. Is any user can essentially log into any combination of farms that they have access to, and I think that that's something that we need to remind consultants and dairy producers that functionality is built in the BoviSync, and it allows you to do this built-in benchmarking. That's how it works. We're not doing anything at the report level. It's at the session level of the application.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do see that Sarah mentioned about some loading time. Definitely. So when you change filters in the filter pane to the left-hand side, and it has to refresh the entire report, it does take longer than if you're just like filtering in place with the field that's under the column name. I am logged into multiple farms with a bunch of animals that are here. I did, for the sake of brevity, did not include the loading time in the video, since I think other people probably don't want to see that. But it does take, I don't feel like it takes an excessively long period of time, but it isn't like immediate to refresh it. The good thing is, once you develop your reports and save them, and you want to open up a bunch of reports, that's usually a one-time sort of load that it's coming in, and then as you're looking at stuff and adding items to a report, it's much snappier. So as I go through here, what I've done is I've grouped it by whether or not animals had a short close-up period. And then I add a filter onto this that's saying, make sure that there's no null value. So they either were not in the close-up pen, they were in the close-up pen for more than 14 days, or they were in a close-up pen for 0 to 14 days. But it's getting rid of all the animals that were not in a close-up pen, period. And so now we can look at how being in the close-up pen for that period of time, and that can be adjusted. So if you want to look at it one way or the other, you can certainly do that with different periods of time. You can see how it affects production and health parameters that you might want to look at. So looking at this, I thought it was kind of interesting. Like milk was a little bit less. I was kind of surprised that the incidence of diseases and things like that were not higher, which could be explained by one of the farms recording things in a different way, or just generally having a little bit different strategy there. When you're looking at it on a per farm basis, I would expect that you would see some of that. But once we have that set, so let's say like in this example, I said, okay, well, maybe I'm not as interested in the sold or died within 30 or 60 days, but I'm kind of interested in, like what is the production response or the effect of being in the close-up pen for less time. And so I've added in that first test butterfat, first test protein, and the first test fat to protein ratio. And you can see there that there does appear to be a difference in what we're seeing, which would, I think, correspond with what most people would expect. And then you can add in peak milk and days in milk at peak and look at how those production parameters correlate to that particular grouping of animals. And you can see, interestingly enough, animals that were in the pen for less than 14 days had 6 pounds less peak milk, and they peaked later than the animals that were in it for more than 14 days. So just as a simple example of how you can take some of these categorizations and apply them to other items within that animal's record that would be very difficult or impossible to do within other systems themselves, and would involve having to pull in records and mess with things in Excel or R or SAS or something like that to get the data that you needed. So that's what I have here as some examples to get the juices flowing and the questions, and happy to answer anything that someone might have.
I've answered 2 questions from Peter.
Squeaky wheel there, Peter. Yeah, so are those answers open to everyone, Clay?
I believe so.
Okay. So basically the charting isn't released yet. It's there in the background. So like I have access to it. So it's not like it needs to be, it's not yet to be created. It just needs to go through more testing and structuring so that it's giving people what they want and not extra, not confusing. And look at outcomes. Yes, so the example that I gave was with production, like milk production parameters. So I can say less than 14 days in the close-up, but I could also say less than 10, or I could say less than 21, or I could say greater than 30. And I could do times bred or days open for those animals. Um, all of those sort of things are possible. Anything that's in that animal record, you can do. You have to get a little bit careful when you're looking at those items that how should I explain it? That like accrue over time. So like days open, right? So um, you would definitely, if you wanted to look at days open, you would need to look at it for just animals that were diagnosed as pregnant, right? Because you don't want to include animals that are yet to be bred because their days open would be lower and then they would screw up how you looked at it. So it's just, you have to be cognizant of what it is you're looking at and be able to think how it works. But the good thing is, it's not a black box. It's not like you type something in and we give you this number and you have to take that number as the effect of the thing that you're looking at. You can drill down into those individual animal records and look at, okay, why is that value getting coded the way that it is, and why is it calculating that way? And you can really figure out why the results you're getting are occurring. And if you can figure that out, then I think you're way more likely to create and utilize reports in a more appropriate manner instead of the two other options, which are to blindly believe the numbers that a program spits out at you, or to completely lose faith in the numbers that a program spits out at you and give up on it. So I really like that about BoviSync, that you can drill down completely and understand like where are these numbers coming from, and be able to validate what it is that you're looking at. If you want to, you don't have to. It can be super simple. We can spit numbers out at you, but for people that want to know that, you can definitely do it.
There's some questions in the chat, Nick.
Yes. Okay, so should we be looking at confidence intervals also? Can we add the days carry calf? Yes, days carry calf from the previous gestation is a item, so that can be added for sure. In another report I was contemplating using for this, I did just that. I looked at groupings of animals and previous days carry calf, and looking at when they dried off and how long they were dry and stuff like that as metrics for what those production responses or health responses in the next lactation were. Shouldn't we be looking at confidence intervals also? Yes, confidence intervals are important from a statistical point of view, saying whether or not something is likely or unlikely to be due to chance alone is a important important item to understand. We do not have confidence intervals as a built-in sort of value. When we do use that drop down to aggregate items, all of the information is there to get you that information. So variance, standard deviation, the count of the animals, all of that is easily accessible there and can actually be duplicated in a single report. So if I wanted to look at that first test butterfat, I can include several copies of that same item. So I can do first test butterfat average, first test butterfat median, first test butterfat variance, first test butterfat standard deviation, all of those things. So I think that could get you a lot of the way there. We had a conversation about this confidence intervals last webinar as well. And so I do think that it is something we're aware of and is clearly something that others are interested in too. That's why I tend to like to use multiple farms and more animal records in the reports that I show, just because like if you're dealing with thousands of animals, like a couple percentage points is a little bit easier to believe than it is with like 100 or two. And the sire, nab, or breed, yes. You all of the animal information, so the sire of all the animals can be brought in as a report item. Service sires of their particular breeding can be brought in. The results of their pregnancy can be brought into any of those reports. So that works. That works.
The item that I think she's looking for is calf sire.
Oh, okay. Of the previous gestation. Sure.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Can we also see pregnancy and heat detection rates? Yeah, so obviously we have that. Was not a focus of the transition kind of side of the equation, but the pregnancy heat detection rates. So we have a breeding intensity report that reports on that as well. We have maybe we can Clay, maybe you can throw in the link to there.
I'll get it, Nick.
Yep. What else are you guys seeing, or questions or thoughts, concerns? Dare I say suggestions? Maybe I shouldn't say suggestions. If I was in the audience, that would be like red meat to me. So
You are your biggest critic, Nick.
no, I don't mean suggestions for like how my presentation can be better. I'll beat myself up about that. But suggestions for how we can make the reports more useful for you and show you how to utilize them better.
So there's a question about colostrum tracking. Are we talking about collecting the colostrum to the calves, or are we just going to record the colostrum from the animal?
So we do have items that are, let me see, maybe I can stop sharing here and I can pull up a browser and see if I can make this a little clearer. So Sarah is asking, I'd like to see how you calculated the percent that were below 1.5. So that is, I can show you, let me share this screen. So this is a table of the event types. And so this will get to the colostrum question, but to answer Sarah's question really quickly, the formula to get the less than 1.5 is just, it's if, and then you do the first, the item name.
This would also apply to colostrum, wherever you want to put your
Yep.
cutoff.
Yep.
You would just put that in them.
Yeah, so you do first butterfat, first protein, peak milk, whatever the item is that you want to look at, greater than 1.5, call it 1. If not, call it 0, and that's it. You can also do ifs, so you can do multiple, but I just did it 2 like that. For the colostrum, and as a understanding of like what things can be brought into any of these reports, this is a table of all the event types. So all the event types are here. So those would be those EVTYP in the reports, event type. And so we have colostrum fed and colostrum yield are items that can be recorded and reported on. Additionally, under diagnostic tests, I believe we have
Blood proteins.
Yeah, we have the blood total protein, which I think we had an example of a week or 2 ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. So you can kind of look at it from both angles, which would be nice because you could have, if you're recording colostrum quality and quantity fed, you can then easily connect it to total protein and then connect it to growth rates, health outcomes, first lactation, performance, etc. Okay.
And the next webinar, Nick, we've got one scheduled for 6:15.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be publicizing that. We are going to focus on multi-site reporting. So if there's some particular reports that any of you would like to see across multi-sites, that would be interesting to share with us, you can email Nick or myself.
Yes, indeed.